What is up, guys? This is Tate Brown here, holding it down. Welcome back to the culture where we have another installation of Across the Pond. We got a great episode for you guys. I don't know if you guys saw the national security strategy just dropped from the United States government, from the Trump administration, and it's more good news for our buddies across the pond. Connor, how's it going, dude?
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, still, things are pretty bad in my country. Literally about an hour before we came on air, I've now got a sitting MP in Parliament and a Scottish newspaper and a national campaign group trying to get me banned from GB News because I said there shouldn't be any foreign ancestry MPs or foreign nationals sitting in our Parliament. So, that obviously sensible thing. The crazy thing is as well, like, when they screenshotted my tweet about it, which was a clip from an interview, they blurred out the first paragraph that said, having the sons and daughters of the Indian subcontinent lobby for open borders in my parliament doesn't represent the British people. And
Yeah.
I just replied with the unblurred tweet, and I was like, are you afraid that people were worried that I was right? So yeah, it's much like a Schumer wasting his time on a Senate motion to condemn Nick Fuentes for his interview with Tucker. Apparently I'm now getting condemned by like sitting MPs who don't have anything better to do.
It's this weird tendency among the old guard to ladder pull on young guys, and I don't even know how much of it is ideologically motivated versus how much of it is insecurity that they were relatively unsuccessful at doing anything in their entire lives. When they see young guys that are actually making moves, making plays, that irritates them beyond all belief, and they respond by trying to ladder pull dunk. It's absolutely ridiculous. We got a new light in the studio. The studio over here is coming together. I'm gonna throw a green screen behind me at some point. I think I could key in a Gartha. I think that would be nice. Sort of add some ambiance, some flair. We'll see how that goes. Also, heads up for everyone. Note to the editor. Milo Yiannopoulos is roaming around the Timcast compound right now. He said he's seeking vengeance for Candace Owens. So if there is a intrusion halfway through the show, that's what's going on. It's a serious situation. I'm barricaded in here.
It's like a gay Wendigo.
Yeah, he's like, it is really it's
Sorry, he
really
is
a
straight now.
tragic
Sorry,
situation.
my bad, Milo. Apologies.
He is a formerly gay Wendigo, which is in many ways even more alarming. That means that he has a chip on his shoulder. So, anyway, with that, let's get into the news. Oh my goodness. Here is some screenshots from the national security strategy that just dropped. I'm going to read this specific quote. This is what jumped out to me. This is a few pages in. I'm just going to read this, and then Connor, you can give your reaction to this as someone who would be a beneficiary from this change in American foreign policy. Quote, over the long term, it is more plausible that within a few decades at the latest, certain NATO members will become majority non-European. As such, it is an open question whether they will view their place in the world or their alliance with the United States in the same way as those who signed the NATO Charter. Our broad policy for Europe should prioritize reestablishing conditions of stability within Europe and strategic stability with Russia, enabling Europe to stand on its own feet and operate as a group of aligned sovereign nations, including by taking primary responsibility for its own defense without being dominated by any adversarial power, cultivating resistance to Europe's current trajectory within European nations, opening European markets to U.S. goods and services and ensuring fair treatment of U.S. workers and business, building up the healthy nations of Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe through commercial ties, weapons sales, political collaboration, and cultural and educational exchanges, ending the perception and preventing the reality of NATO as a perpetually expanding alliance, very interesting, and encouraging Europe to take action to combat mercantilist overcapacity, technological theft, cyber espionage, and other hostile economic practices. Obviously, this document is dripping with a few different notions here. Russia, the current negotiations between Witkoff and team and Russia is obviously on the forefront with a lot of these negotiations. But that was interesting how they opened. They're keenly aware that European countries are becoming non-European. Connor, is this true? Are European countries becoming non-European?
Yeah, despite Piers Morgan's attempts to excuse this, the English are now a minority in their own major cities, Birmingham, Manchester, and London. We don't actually know the numbers because the last time we had a census was 2021, and that was before the infamous Boris wave, where 2.9 to 4 million third world migrants came into the country, many of whom settled, many of whom overstayed their visas. We have like 2 million illegal immigrants at minimum milling about in the country at the moment. The last estimate was 1.2 million in 2017, and we just stopped recording it ever since, before all the mass migration migrant waves. The last ONS data that we got said that at minimum we're 20% of immigrant stock now in the UK, and that's only going to get worse because we've got 1% of the population being added to from migration every year. We've got more deaths than we do births, and of the live births that we have, a third are from immigrant mothers. So that doesn't even count, second generation immigrants also having kids. They're just counted as British because they have the paperwork. And also 1 in 3 pregnancies are aborted, and that is disproportionately among the white British population. So we just are not replacing ourselves, and we are being replaced. And so it's very interesting that, as we discussed in our previous episode, Tate, the Trump administration now consider demographic displacement, as in like the direct wording, displacement by migration of native European populations from their towns and cities and their ancestral homelands to be a human rights violation. This has completely inverted the anti-white, post-colonial narrative that the US State Department, my government, every aggrieved third world shithole that wants our money has spread for years, that says that it's only ethnic cleansing if you return immigrants to their nations of origin, and it's only ethnic cleansing if white majority countries set up colonial outposts that end up improving, especially in the British Empire, various third world countries. But it's not ethnic cleansing if unwanted migrants come into said countries, chase white majorities out of their cities and establish ethnic outposts there, and then lobby via democratic politics using their demographic strongholds for importing more of their countrymen into our country. And so it's very encouraging in the same document. There was a passage where under the priorities list, the heading is just, the era of mass migration is over. Border security is the primary element of national security. And so it makes sense. Like, if, as J.D. Vance semi-joked in 2024 at NatCon, Britain becomes a nuclear-armed state, a bit like Pakistan, well, it's harder to have the Five Eyes and NATO and bilateral security agreements with a country that ultimately will agree that America is the great Satan.
Yeah, well, it's tough to cultivate a military and, intel network with countries that have this sort of suicidal tendency. I mean, France is a great example. France doesn't conduct the census. They don't conduct demographic, racial data on their census by law. It is illegal in France for them to collect any sort of information on the ethnic makeup of their country. And you have to wonder, I mean, look, when you think about France, one of the top sort of traits that the French have is they have this propensity to riot. They have this propensity to chimp out. And you have to wonder that the French government are probably keenly aware that if the ethnic breakdown of their country were to be publicly known, it would probably instigate a riot of some sort. It would instigate a massive overhaul of the way that they conduct their affairs in France. And to go back to my first point, it is impossible for America to build an alliance with a country that has this suicidal tendency. Yeah, I mean, they've highlighted over and over again that these countries becoming non-European. How can you build a relationship with a country that's about to be demographically overhauled? That's a different country. I mean, if England, becomes majority non-English, it ceases to be England. So that's on one thing. And then also you see throughout the strategy here, the strategy document, is they keep sort of issuing this demand that Europe is able to stand on its own feet. I obviously opened by saying, Witkoff is currently negotiating with the Russians. Who knows what kind of deal is going to be struck there. But clearly it's at the forefront, is in particular how the Germans conducted their affairs over the last decade by, they have a dependency on Russia. And that's just unacceptable for a variety of reasons. If we truly are going to continue to antagonize Russia, if we're going to continue to sort of have this conflict with Russia, it becomes more and more implausible to actually build an alliance with a country that is, hooked at the hip with a country that is, for the United States, an adversary, a global adversary. And so it is really encouraging. I mean, Trump obviously has said this over and over again. It's unacceptable that the NATO the European countries aren't pulling their weight in NATO. And there's no question about that. So this document is actually really broad. It's hitting on a few different things, but obviously us on the right, particularly the Zoomers, who are at the forefront. We're kind of the first generation that's really experiencing the demographic change firsthand. It's directly impacting us. That's the part that really is just such a radical reorientation of American foreign policy. Because we talked about it at length, obviously last weekend. Is the foreign, the way that the United States has conducted themselves with foreign affairs is they've encouraged these European countries to commit suicide. They've encouraged these countries to open the door and allow this demographic overhaul of their country. So now, again, I said it last week, I'll say it again, the Trump administration at this point is no longer just taking the boot off of the European right broadly, off of the neck, but they're actually encouraging them to sort of stand on their own 2 feet, to reestablish these countries and sort of actually advocate for the populations that make up these countries, the core population.
Yeah, I've got quite a few thoughts on that. Obviously, my proximity to the European continent means I pay a little more attention to European politics than most Americans do, but even then, I wish I didn't have to know what the French and Germans were doing other than, preparing for war against them. But in times like these, old enemies become old friends. It's all the same struggle. The German dependency on Russian energy comes from the fact that they were listening to not only the Swedish schoolgirl, Greta Thunberg, who should have spent a bit more time in school, but actually, to be fair, if it's American public school, then she would have turned out even more deranged than she currently is. But they also listened to the scaremongering around nuclear power plants after Fukushima, after the massive earthquake and tsunami. Angela Merkel, who is responsible both for the mass migrant crisis because a small child cried at her on a German TV station, and the next day she said, "Wir schaffen das," and opened Germany's borders to Syria and Afghanistan and all of the rapists and terrorists that came over. But also, she, despite having an engineering degree, and it shows you that you shouldn't trust the experts, began the process of closing down all of Germany's nuclear power plants. Now, France doesn't do that. France has a bunch of nuclear power plants. It actually generates a surplus of energy and then sells it to its neighbors. So that's just an eminently sensible thing to do. We should have been doing that. I actually wrote some policy for the government back in 2021 saying how they could fund a bunch of nuclear power initiatives, and they adopted some of it but then didn't listen to all of it. And in my paper before 2022, and obviously the Russian incursion into Ukraine, I warned about the fact that we were buying Russian oil in limited quantities. We're also buying it from the Qataris and some from the Americans as well, and that we should cut back on our imports and start using our own domestic oil and gas capacity, the North Sea. If we only use 10% of that, we'd have energy independence for 50 years. But we don't do that because of various climate change legislation. And I said that this would be a strategic liability if, we were to go to war with Russia. And this is one of the reasons why I'm so encouraged by this document, because if we were to engage in a hot conflict with Russia, which the likes of Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron are very keen about, and so was Joe Biden for a while, then, I would be conscripted to go and die in a ditch in Ukraine in favor of what? Like getting demographically replaced in my own country, having a mosque put in my high street, or, you guys having infinite H-1B Indians? Like, no thank you, I'm not sacrificing for that. So the Germans sacrificing their nuclear energy independence, their energy abundance, to go fully renewable in a country that doesn't have the sunshine of California, and with wind turbines they had to then export from China anyway, was disastrous. They then had rolling blackouts and brownouts all across Germany. So then they had to start buying oil from Russia and use it via the Nord Stream 2. And then Nord Stream 2 got blown up potentially on American orders. It seems that they've prosecuted some Ukrainian general for his involvement in this, but there was some insinuation that the order came from Washington, obviously because it's strategic to get America be the net energy exporter again, even though they were restricting energy exports after the Trump administration made you guys energy independent. Anyway, Europe has had a suicidal energy, defense, and immigration strategy, and they've also been sacrificing on their NATO payments so they can pay for their welfare state, which then disproportionately goes to said layabout immigrants in the first place. You guys think you have a problem with Somalians, as Trump has been pointing out in this last week. Do you know, in Britain, 72% of Somalians are in social housing, and a further 25 or so percent are in prison. That means almost every single Somalian that is in Britain, I am paying for. My taxes are paying for. Why am I battery farming Somalians? No idea. You'd think that would be a security risk. So it's encouraging that they're tying in energy, national security, and demographics and migration all into their elaborate security strategy. And then something I found very interesting as well, picking up on the German and French points. So there was a State Department press briefing that was moderated, and it was mainly with the German, Latin American, Canadian, British, and Australian press. And there was a senior State Department official that did a few quotes, and they said, I want to reiterate what the tweet thread that we went through said, which is that mass migration is an existential threat to Western civilization and the safety of both the West and the world. We're particularly concerned not only about the violation of national sovereignty, which in itself is already an egregious violation of basic rights and the rights of sovereign citizens in these countries, but also human rights abuses and what we see as very egregious human rights concerns surrounding mass migration and the facilitation of mass migration. We also see instances of human trafficking, anti-Semitic, and anti-Christian attacks, largely by people of radical Islamic backgrounds. And the reason I raise that is, number one, it's not just important that there are State Department officials that are basically going off script from the Trump administration that have hitherto only focused on the anti-Semitism both in America and abroad, but are now singing the tune of the likes of J.D. Vance, concerned about the persecution of Christians, not just by Muslims, but governments who persecute them for silently praying in their own head outside abortion facilities, which goes on frequently in Britain. But also the highlighting of the Islamic migration component. It's not just Islamic migration, like Haitians are a problem, loads of Africans that don't work and commit crimes because they've got high rates of schizophrenia are a problem, see Axel Rudikabana, the Southport murderer. But Muslim migration specifically is a big problem, because when you say that they don't collect demographic data for France, that's true in terms of ethnicity, but we just found out the other day that the estimate is now that 1 in 10 people in France are Muslim. That means it's way higher, because these estimates are probably based on old data. So it's probably 1 in 9. And that's not counting the illegals that are currently waiting in Calais to board an inflatable dinghy and sail across to England. So if 1 in 10, 1 in 9 people in your country are Muslim, that's going to lead to a parallel rise in anti-Muslim sentiment in the immigration restrictionist party. And that's why you'll find this really funny. There was a freak out earlier today. There's an article that some leftists wrote that you could put the Giga Chad and the crying Wojak over the top of, where he was complaining that France and Germany's far right were basically just full of gays. So Alice Weidel, lesbian, Marine Le Pen, lesbian, and a third to 2/3 of national rally staffers were gay men. This is why Renaud Camus, the guy who coined the term, and I'm going to use a synonym here for YouTube just so we don't get censored, the large swap theory, is himself a gay Frenchman who said to feminists, gay people, and Jews, you're soaring off the branch you're sitting on if you keep importing Muslims because you will just be replaced and murdered. And so it's hilarious that they've pushed literally everyone possible to the camp of, we just don't want these violent migrants in our country establishing a caliphate, and now the State Department are having to intervene on behalf of these besieged populations because the government knows this is happening in Germany, France, the UK, Canada, Australia, and yet do nothing. So yeah, completely welcome intervention both for national security and the fact that I don't want to accelerate white flight out of my own ancestral homeland.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I think there's two motivating factors here. Is one, it's been known for some time that Trump is a bit of an Anglophile. He has a keen interest in sort of preserving Britain at large. And I think the proof of this was there was a note that was circulating. It was sometime last week where the Trump administration was encouraging its ambassadors and fellow Anglosphere countries to advocate for the same immigration policy the United States has, which has resulted in the Trump administration, has resulted in net negative migration, which is, again, something that 5 years ago advocating for would have got you thrown off of a conservative panel, and now is the official policy of the United States, which is fantastic. But the other moving part here is it's doubling down, and this is kind of the whole reason for the show in many ways, is that Americans have this sort of connection with Western Europe specifically that is very real. It's very tangible. Again, it's certainly an ethnic component, obviously, because America is a European country or European descended country. Americans, we can kind of let our allies wander a bit, but with Europe, there's always going to be this connection. There's always going to be this interest from the United States. And it would take quite a bit for America to truly abandon Europe. And again, I think that's just because of this intrinsic connection. And a lot of people that have come to the United States that have not come from Europe don't understand this. I just want to highlight a tweet here that was from Sneeko, the famous streamer. And he tweeted, this was yesterday, there are roughly 250,000 Somalis in the entirety of America. Anybody on the right wing scoring, quote, based points by screaming about them is another paid APAC shill every single time. This just indicates to me that you don't quite get it. You don't quite get what's going on, is that Americans actually do I mean, I know we're not, Americans aren't famous for, our keen, keeping tabs on global affairs, but I think Americans are vaguely aware, especially conservative white Americans are vaguely aware of the destruction that Islam is causing in Europe that's real and tangible and has nothing to do with what the affairs of Israel is. I mean, obviously Israel also views Islam broadly as an opponent. But like to just harp on and say, oh, well, it's only 250,000 Somalis. Why are you worried? Because Americans have seen what's happened in Europe. I mean, I had Tommy Robinson on my show on the Tatecast Noon Live Timcast Live show, and he emphasized over and over again. He was saying like, look, I mean, I know there's not many in America right now, but you have to keep an eye on them because they breed like rabbits. I mean, Wajahat Ali, the commentator of Islamic extraction, he emphasized this. He said, "We are a breeding people. You let us in. That's on you." I actually am kind of thankful to Wajahat, in a way, because it was so on the nose. I was like, oh, this actually gives us an example of what to show to people that are maybe on the fence about immigration restriction of like, no, this is how they, fundamentally how they believe, even if it's subconsciously. But all this to say, yeah, this document is dripping in Trump himself, the personal beliefs of Trump. Again, he has this interest in preserving Britain. I mean, he really doesn't like to see it be destroyed in this way, but also Americans at large. Again, I don't think that's going anywhere, at least anytime soon. The real love that America has for Europe, at least, the core of heritage American population has for Europe.
If we could get back to the kind of Europe that is depicted lovingly in Studio Ghibli movies, I think that everyone would be very healthy for it. Regarding Islam being a civilizational threat, I've got a lot to say on this. First of all, I may as well get out ahead of this. I actually have encountered Sneeko once before, and that's because as a teenager, both he and I used to do really cringe Call of Duty videos, and we ran into each other and didn't get along. And he stuck with it, and I just closed my channel down because I didn't have a life and had to get some friends. So yeah, totally embarrassing. Scrub that one from the internet. Anyway, Sneeko is trying to build this sort of coalition of the resentful, with Zionism and Israel and Jews being the only divider by which friend-enemy is determined. And I actually think it's demographics, migration. Islam is a subset of that, but that's only because Islam is not a purely ideological thing. And this is what a lot of civic nationalists get wrong. I respect Tommy's work on the grooming gangs, but I think I differ with him on this a little bit. It's that Islam is not purely a product of values. It entrenches the 7th century cousin marrying clan networks in the countries that it operates in, which is why the likes of Somalia has a lot of incest. It has so much incest, actually, that the country is such a failed state that you can't actually track the level of incest like you can in other countries. Patrick Nash has done work on this. He's an Oxford academic. So Somalia and Islamic countries are completely incompatible with Anglo-Protestantism because, as in Alan McFarlane's book, The Origins of English Individualism, which is basically the few hundred years of history preceding the Pilgrims going to America and establishing the colonies, and then the Englishmen who wrote the Declaration of Independence, and then the Constitution, and established America as basically England's greatest invention. This is what they thought. This is the truths they thought to be self-evident. In England, we didn't marry our cousins, we certainly didn't marry our siblings, and we certainly didn't marry children. The average age of marriage in the Middle Ages was 20-something. We have excellent record-keeping, unlike Somalia. Cousin marriage was basically non-existent. It was outlawed by the first Archbishop of Canterbury, and even though it was repealed by Henry VIII after the Catholic Church had ratified it in the 13th century, only a few members of the royal family, like Queen Victoria or even Queen Elizabeth II, did it, while the general population didn't do it at all. It's always been less than 1%. Similar in America, despite, the South having this poor reputation for Alabama being full of cousin marriage. Just not true, actually. It's not the case in white countries. And our ability to marry outside of our family, to move across the country, to establish new farmsteads, to interact with people who weren't in our immediate family, meant we developed manners and mutual moral consideration and a universal moral system conjoined with Christianity treating people made in the image of God, that meant that we had universal morality, that meant that sort of liberal individualism was second nature to us. Whereas if you are marrying your cousin or marrying your sibling, and then you have the concept in Islam of asabaya, which means clannish morality, which means you only extend moral consideration out beyond yourself to your family, your clan, and the global Muslim race, the Ummah, then you're not going to be able to think individualistically. You're not going to be able to incorporate yourself into Anglo-Protestant morality or Catholicism or at least the liberal materialist simulacra of Christianity that contemporary culture, consumerism has created. And so Islam is the furthest possible thing, both ethnically and ideologically, from our respective countries in the Anglosphere and Western Europe. So it's just incompatible. And just creating a coalition of leftists, rightists, and Muslims against ZOG is not enough to bind a country together. It's a product and a project that's ultimately doomed for failure. So the ultimate question, if the ultimate question is Israel or Palestine, the answer is always us, our people, and that doesn't include you and your insane religion that requires you to worship a 7th century warlord who may not have even existed, who married children, married his own cousin, who then allegedly poisoned him, and she was part Jewish, and that's why they think that they're going to kill the Jews, and then Judgment Day is going to come, except one tree that's like not going to snitch on the Jews, because that's the Jewish tree. This thing is actually in the Hadiths. It's fucking crazy, right? And the idea that you're going to co-opt Jesus Christ and deny the incarnation, deny the crucifixion, deny the resurrection, and then he's going to come back on Judgment Day, break his cross in half, and say, submit to Allah. Like, all of this is complete disrespect and incompatibility with the Christian heritage and the individualistic thinking of the Anglosphere. And so the idea that we should be making common cause with Muslims to settle some score, and fair enough, legitimate criticisms against Israel, its propensity to drag America and Britain into foreign adventurism in the Middle East, the ethnocentrism and double standards of Jewish lobbyists in our respective countries, which, you know, I've done a video on recently, and it got me in a little bit of hot water. I'm capable of making these distinctions and making these criticisms without allying with a tradition that has nothing but contempt for white people and Christians and would turn my country into a caliphate. So actually, no, focusing on denaturalizing and deporting every single Somalian, not just the illegals, but also the legals, maybe like sparing Ayaan Hirsi Ali because she's nice, is a top priority for the Trump administration, because, as well, even if you're just going to say it's just a matter of scale, it's just a matter of numbers, it doesn't really matter. This was Nick's argument, right, on Stephen Crowder's show and Alex Jones's show. He's just saying it's not that big a deal compared to Jewish influence. And it's like, no, it's as big a deal to the people living in Dearborn, Michigan, or Minneapolis, Minnesota, or the various ethnic enclaves that are taking over Texas right now. It's as big a deal as the H-1B Indians establishing their outposts in Silicon Valley, or again in Texas, erecting giant monkey god statues. Demographics and culture and identity is the issue. And if that's not your friend-enemy dividing line, then you are my enemy.
Right. Well, yeah, it's like if you're using a foreign horde as leverage to, again, settle a score with a group. Again, how does that make you any less subversive than the group that you're accusing of being subversive in the first place? And also, another issue, this is not what Sneeko is arguing for. There's other people in the space that the argument is similar, but you actually have to understand the differentiation here. This is not the argument Sneeko is making, but what the argument is that Islam, and you were saying this earlier, is the secondary issue of the larger issue of demographic change, because again, it's not good enough to just be Christian to assimilate into the United States. It's not even good enough to be like an Anglican Protestant, Episcopalian or whatever. A Haitian is going to have as much of a difficult time assimilating into the United States as a Somalian, as an Islamic Somalian. And Haiti is like, 95% Christian, Catholic, et cetera, et cetera. The Haitians have equally as difficult of a time. And Oran McIntyre makes this point all the time, and it's an excellent point. I'm going to paraphrase a bit, so if I screw something up, he can correct that. But the Constitution is just a snapshot of what the values were of the people that made up America at the time that it was framed. And again, the evidence for this is that, in the early stages of the United States, they didn't view the Constitution as restrictive in any way. It wasn't this like, oh, well, if only this was out of the way, then we could do this sort of thing. Where now the Constitution is always being deliberated over. There's always people that feel like it's constricting or they want to make changes and these sorts of things. Is because the makeup of the country now, as you were making the point earlier, they don't just kind of naturally exude the values that you find in the Constitution. It's not natural to them, and it's because it's a Constitution that was framed for a wildly different demographic. Where again, in colonial America and early America, everyone would look at the Constitution and say, "Yeah, I don't even know why this has to be written down." I mean, there's this point that's made all the time. It's like the fact that you have to write down something indicates that something's wrong. This should just naturally occur. I mean, you look, not to get too nerdy, but you look at pre-Norman England. They didn't really have a lot of written laws. There wasn't a lot, because a lot of these things just kind of naturally occurred to people. And as soon as you start introducing more and more components to a society, the laws have to get more and more expansive to account for that. And that's why people are making the point like, hey, with Donald Trump as president, he needs to wield executive power quite extensively to get us out of this mess. It's unfortunate. A lot of people have this impulse, rightfully so, to be skeptical of government power because it's screwed us over so much over the last 60 years. But with the current makeup of the country, with the way that things stand, we can't just reduce the size of the government and reduce its grip on power and just hope that like somehow everything just sorts itself out. It's like, no, we have to restore the conditions that allow us to live without heavy government intervention. And the only way we're going to get out of that is using extensive government power. But yeah, to close, I mean, yeah, again, that's not the argument Sneeko is making. Sneeko is basically just saying, let's just use Muslims as leverage, as like a battering ram against Jews, which is ridiculous for so many reasons.
But America shouldn't be a battleground for the 1,000-year blood libels of random Middle Eastern tribes. Like, it should be for heritage Americans, and if you're not arguing for that, again, you're the enemy. If I can just pick up on that quickly just before we finish, in a bit of UK news that relates to this, because you mentioned the Norman Conquest, and it reminded me. So at the moment, our Justice Secretary is a man named David Lammy. David Lammy is the biggest moron in the country. He thought Henry VII came after Henry VIII. He went on the show Mastermind and just cratered, right? So he went from being the foreign secretary, getting mogged by J.D. Vance in the summer. He was the sort of short, fat black guy who just looked like he had a telling off on a naughty step. He is now the deputy prime minister and the justice secretary, and he is about to abolish, and I shit you not, trial by jury. Now, we have had this since Alfred the Great wrote his Doom book, you know, the first proper king of all of England who repudiated the Viking invaders. We've had this in our common law. We gifted this to America via Blackstone's formulation based on Sodom and Gomorrah, where obviously Abraham bargains with God, and he says, if I can find only a few innocent persons, will you not destroy the city? And that's where you get the maxim that Benjamin Franklin ended up elaborating on to say, it's better that 100 guilty persons go free than one innocent person suffer. We've had this embedded in Magna Carta, in Articles 39 and 40, we've had this embedded since Edward II, following the Norman Conquests, wrote into law the fact that you needed a trial by jury in his legal reforms. We had it in the Bill of Rights in 1689. So these are part of the ancient customs and liberties that Englishmen afford to themselves. They're not part of liberal, international, universalist human rights. They're not part of the post-war consensus. This is the English tradition based on Christianity. David Lammy, much like the Norman Conquest before him, who, you know, came over from France, financed by French Jews, ended up replacing the governance structure, didn't actually leave that much of a demographic footprint. Turns out it was only like 5%. And between 1066 and 1945, we were like 90% the same genetic people, very few inflows of migration. We were 99% white British until like 1948 when the Windrush rocked up, and we have this new modern mythology that Britain was always black and it was our second Mayflower, which David Lammy likes to talk about because despite saying he's
Cheddar
black,
Man's not actually a good reflection of the Anglo-Saxon.
Well, Cheddar Man's ancestor was found right round the corner to him, teaching history at a local school, and he is pale with blue eyes. And it turns out, according to Tom Rousel, Survive the Drive, who was an anthropologist who did a documentary on it, Cheddar Man himself probably would have had Northwestern European hunter-gatherer DNA, and that would have given him blue eyes. So that model is also bunk and bullshit. But David Lammy himself, despite saying he's black English, which isn't a category that exists because you can't be black and English, he described himself as a Caribbean person and shouted for reparations in Parliament. So, like, if you were English, David, would you be paying reparations to yourself, you cretin? But David Lammy clearly falls outside the ancient customs and liberties that Englishmen expect of themselves. So this is coming back to your point, Tate. It's that it's not just enough to be born in a country. It's not just enough to nominally share the religion or to have been the first black British man to have attended Harvard Law School, which is a real indictment of Harvard Law School. It shows that this is an intergenerational problem, that our culture, our traditions, our ways of life are just not intuitive to foreign peoples. And there might be a very small number of foreign peoples from proximate cultures or complete unicorns from distant cultures, like someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who renounce their past identity, renounce all loyalties to princes and principalities, who adopt the religion of the state, who marry into the tribe, and who are actually wanted by the majority population in their country because they're nice people. But the likelihood of that happening is so infinitesimally small, it's just not worth the risk. And so people who are from different countries are unlikely to ever integrate fully and submit their instincts and identity to our traditions, not by spite, but just out of habit. And so, frankly, lots and lots of them have to go. It doesn't matter about the quantity. If Sneako's quibbling about this, and he's quibbling about it in an insincere way because he's a Muslim himself, what matters is having a culturally and largely ethnically coherent country which forms the stable foundations of a civic polity, the pre-political we, from which you can then start debating logistical issues as a shared community with a shared identity. If you don't denaturalize and deport these unwanted guests, you don't get to have a country anymore. And that holds for the US just as much as it does the UK, Canada, and the rest of Europe. So, also in UK news, and this will be of interest to you, Tate, Tucker Carlson visited in the last week, and he only did 3 interviews while he was here. He interviewed, now infamously, Piers Morgan, trying to get him to say a bunch of slurs, and he was goading him, saying that he was worried about being imprisoned, but it's just Piers Morgan's a congenital shitlib who doesn't want to offend people. He's not worried about getting arrested. He then interviewed a race communist called George Galloway, who is like a political grifter who keeps standing in different seats and is an utter third worldist. I think he married a Palestinian woman, and he lied about the demographics and said that, if you're attacking a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi, you're just doing what the billionaires want you to do. Total third world brain mentality, diminishing the heinous crimes of the Pakistani grooming gang scandal.
He's like the old school version of the Jew-brained people that are just obsessed with Israel. He's almost like the boomer version of that. It's not the rich, it's the rich.
He is also obsessed with Israel, by the way.
That's true.
That's his entire shtick. Man, just focus on England, please, dear God. Just focus on America. It's possible to not get hung up on some strip of sand in the Middle East, and also, by the way, want the influence of that strip of sand in the Middle East to get out of your politics. That's a consistent position. Yeah. But the third interview he did was that of Rupert Lowe, and that is not a name that people maybe outside those who have watched my Timcast appearances might be familiar with. But this is important because Tucker had asked Nigel Farage to do an interview. And Nigel Farage, everyone knows, as Mr. Brexit. He's currently the head of the Reform Party. They're top of the polls. And Nigel Farage said no to Tucker, obviously fearing the backlash from him interviewing Nick Fuentes. His staff, Tucker's staff, who are our guys, they're Zoomers, they follow our politics, said, well, we actually kind of like Rupert. And so he got in touch with one of my friends who works with Rupert, set the interview up, and now Rupert Lowe has done an interview with Tucker Carlson, which has just aired as of time of filming. And now Rupert Lowe is going to look like the presumptive king of the right to alternative media viewers in America. And this is very important considering Nigel Farage has been inconsistent on issues like mass deportations and remigration. His party have ostracized up-and-comers in the new right, including me. I was banned from a Reform event recently. And so people have started wavering in their faith as to not whether or not Nigel Farage will win an election, but whether or not he'll actually do the things that people want when he gets into government. Whereas Rupert Lowe's just come on the scene. And we've just done some polling, by the way, in the UK. Rupert Lowe, if he were to lead a party, and he hasn't even got a party yet, he's an independent, would take 10% of the vote, including votes from Reform and the Conservatives. So that's already competitive with a bunch of existing parties, just as a man on his own. And his local party, because they've got local elections coming up next year, he's going to try and run some candidates in his constituency of Great Yarmouth to sit on the council there. His local party he's just established has rocketed to 44% of the vote share, dwarfing every other party. So he's clearly got a mandate, and it's interesting that now he is the most popular MP on social media, and now he's going to get a massive platform in the States via Tucker. So I wonder what people are going to make of this.
Yeah, well, I mean, for one, this puts this on the radar of everyone in Republican politics in the United States. Obviously, I mean, people probably heard the name, but they don't know. I think a lot of people in the States just assume that Farage is fine. They assume that he's the analog of Trump, and that's just couldn't be further from the truth. I know a lot of people in the space have made this point too, and it looks like Rupert is finally cashing in on this sort of bet. It's not even a bet, it's the sensible decision to make. But, I mean, obviously Reform crowded out a lot of young patriots in Britain, and a lot of them ended up in the conservative ranks again because it was the only place to go. And Rupert understood this, capitalized on it, and it's obviously paying dividends here through the network, etc. He has more energy, the ideas that he's speaking on clearly indicate that he's more in touch with the problems affecting the young youth, or the youth in Britain. And it's a really beautiful thing. Again, with the first point, Tucker amplifying him stateside, it's going to pay dividends. I mean, people like Elon Musk, people like Rupert's been on his radar. Obviously, he's been involved in in UK politics, and he had this famous rift with Nigel Farage. It was like, what, 2 years ago at this point. This is just going to be massive for Rupert. I mean, he already has so much momentum, and getting the American right on his side is a massive, massive deal. It just gives him, it makes him the king and American right-wing media. Who knows where it goes from here? Does he do Fox hits? Does he, start doing the podcast circuit in the States, building that support? Because, I mean, look, the public opinion in the United States so far has been that Farage, he must be this like Trump analog. That's great. He does these funny photo shoots where he's smoking a cigarette and he looks really cool. And that's really the extent of what Americans know about Nigel Farage. Again, if you were to just watch any interview that Farage is in, it's clear that he is nowhere near as based as Donald Trump.
Yeah, Rupert's much more a Trump analog because Rupert, a bit like Cincinnatus, is a former farmer who's basically put down a plow to take up an office of state. Like Trump, he donates his salary every month to charity because he's independently wealthy, whereas, and this isn't a slight against Nigel, everyone's got to make their bag, but Nigel has always been interested in making vast amounts of money. He was a city trader, he is a representative for a gold bullion brand, he's paid handsomely for his GB News show, even though he can't consistently present it because of various ridiculous Ofcom laws in this country. We have a state regulator for broadcasting that demands that politicians can only have certain hours and can't host a show or appear at certain numbers of times during elections. It's insane, right? So Farage is working within those constraints, but the fact that he's working within those constraints and hasn't recognized what Trump did, the media are the enemy, and still feels pressure to concede to the media on occasion, means that he has salami sliced off allies that would have otherwise been useful. So Rupert Lowe is the perfect example of this. Nigel Farage, his party is a company, and it's co-owned by a man named Zia Yusuf. Zia Yusuf, for Americans to understand, is R. Vivek Ramaswamy. Zia Yusuf is the son of Sri Lankan immigrants. He ran a company called Velocity Black, and nobody's really sure what it did. It was like a luxury concierge brand, but all the reviews are really bad, including by people that used to work there. He sold it for a very high evaluation, and then gave Reform UK £200,000 in donation, and was, after the election, after he made one speech before the election about British values, he was made the party chairman. He had arrived for all of 5 minutes and was made party chairman. They kicked out Ben Habib, who was the former deputy party chairman, because he disagreed with Nigel Farage and didn't win his seat at the election. They've treated him quite badly. And then a few months in, Rupert Lowe was being critical about the fact that the party wasn't fostering young talent, that he'd said that Farage was basically a beech tree under whom nobody grows. He wasn't quite as insulting at that point, but he did say that Nigel Farage is the messiah, but you can't be a one-man band in politics. You need to have a shadow cabinet, and you need to bring up MPs through the ranks. You need to harness independent media. For this, for a concocted sort of vendetta, Zia Yusuf reported Rupert Lowe to the police for apparently a threat that he'd made in December, but he'd waited till March to do it. They then ousted him with a coordinated letter with Lee Anderson, who is another MP in the party whip, and Rupert Lowe's home got raided in the middle of the night. He's 67, by the way. His shotguns got taken. They then started investigating his staff. They investigated him on misogynistic bullying. Like, the entire thing was ridiculous. Rupert refuted these allegations with a few tweets in a few hours. He went through the process, which was the punishment, but he's come out the other side of it, and he's now the most popular MP on social media. And part of this was the reason why Elon Musk fell out with Farage, because Elon Musk saw ahead of time when Farage was ritualistically denouncing Tommy Robinson and saying that he'd abused a woman and went to prison for it, which is factually untrue and has never been retracted. Elon Musk said Farage isn't the guy, and he could kind of sense that Farage might win an election, but by the time he gets over the finish line, he's going to turn around and find he's without allies except for Zia Yusuf, which means that Zia Yusuf is actually the true purpose of reform. It's not to make Nigel Farage Prime Minister, it's to make Zia Yusuf the first Muslim Prime Minister of the UK. And Zia Yusuf was introduced to Farage, by the way, by a man named Paul Marshall, who owns GB News, The Spectator, Unheard, who helped Kemi Badenoch become the leader of the Conservative Party. He's Winston Marshall's dad, for those who know the podcast. He owns a bunch of think tanks. He owns Jordan Peterson's ARC, and he's trying to buy the Telegraph newspaper. He basically owns both major right-wing parties, pretty much every press outlet in the UK, pretty much every major think tank, and ARC, the international conference. And he put Zia Yusuf in reform. He was the reason that Zia Yusuf has become chairman. Zia actually quit in a huff because one of the MPs said that they should ban the burqa, And then, like George Costanza, he comes back to work the next day and actually gets a promotion. Like, what is this guy's power in the party? It's so opaque. So it's actually encouraging that Rupert Lowe has told that story to Tucker, is setting himself apart from Reform, who have been playing catch-up to people they've derided as the online right, like me, who said at Reform's conference back before I was banned, they should do mass deportations. I got an applause from the crowd, but Nigel Farage actually kicked Rupert out of the party by saying Rupert calling for mass deportations was a dark and dangerous use of rhetoric. Like, Farage was counter-signaling the Trump administration with that, guys.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
He's only just caught up to mass deportations in summer when it was safe, when, like, a bunch of mums were protesting against illegal migrants outside hotels because there were a bunch of sex offenders. Rupert's been ahead of the curve on this, and he's consistently taken the Trump line of, you can call me a racist, you can call me a fascist, you can try and ban me from everywhere, I don't care. And that's the energy the right needs. All he needs now is a viable political vehicle to deliver him victory.
Yeah, I mean, there's this kind of debate that's been occurring on the right. I know Scott Greer has actually been one that's pushed this this sort of narrative that what's occurring on the right now is this embrace of kind of this clown world sort of ethos. It's dominated the right-wing media sphere, where they just turn the collapse of the West into like spectacle and theatrics and it's very performative. And Farage thrives in that sort of environment. He thrives in an environment where he doesn't actually have to drill down on any policy. He could present these platitudes that, again, sort of are sort of bold. They're loud. It's a spectacle. And so maybe that's why people in the United States link him to Trump in some ways. Where Lowe, he's kind of post-spectacle in a lot of ways. It seems like Britain can't really thrive in a spectacle environment for nearly as long. Because Lowe is, he's anti-theatrical, he's sort of procedural, he's more administrative, and that's gonna resonate a lot more with people in Britain who they need some order, because the clown world does not really serve the British people right now. Americans, that's kind of how we operate a little more, and that's where it is. But even Trump, I mean, the second term, there has been a lot more seriousness from the administration. There's obviously been some great sound bites. There's been some funny moments. But also, the way the Trump administration has been conducting affairs has been, administrative primarily. And so that's where Farage kind of comes short. I can't remember who made the distinction. Farage is kind of a pub populist, while Lowe is sort of an administrative aristocrat in some ways. And that's kind of what Britain is crying out for right now. I think Britain doesn't need any more spectacle. I think the British people, the ones that are listening, are aware of the issues at this point. They need someone that can actually drill down on policy, that's not going to ladder pull on young, talented staff. I mean, there's a whole array of reasons why the pub populism is just not really going to cut it when we're actually trying to save Britain, to restore Britain. And Charlie Downs made this point, was it last weekend? It was excellent on the show, where he said, look, reform, it's in the name. They're just trying to reform the system. It just needs a few tweaks. Maybe just move some zeros around and then it'll be fine. Where restore Britain, that really indicates what's going on here, is no, the current system's broken. We need to restore it back to what it was. And that's a really powerful imagery. It kind of, it doesn't have the same punch, in my opinion, as Make America Great Again, but it kind of harps on that same idea of no, America's not great right now, actually. I know every Republican on stage in 2016 was saying, America's the greatest place on planet Earth. This is great. We need to move a few zeros around. And Trump gets up there and says, actually, everything kind of sucks right now. And it used to be great, so let's just go back to that. What were we doing before that made us great? That's what this reminds me of. And I don't know if you agree with that assessment of sort of the clown world assessment, but it seems really poignant to what's going on right now.
I do, and it's because the contrast of Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain doing freedom of information requests, getting data that no other party or politician or press outlet is able to procure, giving speeches in Parliament that blow the barn doors off, single-handedly shoving the Overton window on mass deportations and forcing even the Labour government to look as if they're trying to get them done. You contrast that with Nigel Farage, who is selling football T-shirts and welcoming, I think it's 35 now, total defectors from the Conservative Party, either sitting Conservative MPs or former Conservatives. The worst example about this was at the Reform conference, not just Michael Gove, my personal arch nemesis, interviewing Zia Youssef, which was very suspicious, by the way, but Nigel Farage welcoming on stage an MP, a former MP, called Nadine Dorries. Nadine Dorries was Boris Johnson's right-hand woman. And she personally wrote and tried to pass the Online Safety Act, which, if you're getting age gate verification pop-ups on my Substack now, that's because of that. She went on Sky News, a leftist TV outlet in the UK, and said that she would imprison Jimmy Carr for a joke about gypsies in the Holocaust because it was offensive. So this is the woman that Reform celebrated at their conferences as like a headline guest defecting to them, and she immediately started saying, well, Reform should take in Boris Johnson, unite the right. It's like Boris Johnson flooded us with millions of third worlders. They're the only reason that Reform has destroyed the Conservatives, is set to destroy Labour, and is going to win an election, as it stands, as the ostensible anti-immigration party, is because people see the Boris wave milling about in their high streets and think, oh my god, not just do I want to get rid of every illegal, but 45% of the electorate, according to YouGov, want to denaturalize and deport legals. By the way, when you say that it's not as punchy as Make America Great Again, Rupert Lowe's personal phrase is just 2 words: detain, deport. That's it. Yeah, so, yeah, pretty solid. You kind of know what the guy stands for, right? I think that's a winning platform. But as well, with Reform, they're actually behind the electorate. Gawain Towler, who's been Nigel Farage's long-standing advisor, and Gawain's a nice guy, but back in the UKIP days, he allowed Hope Not Hate to vet their candidates, so not great instincts. He described Nigel Farage as the perfect surfer. Like, he comes up over the crest of the wave and only rides it into safety, whereas Rupert Lowe is the wave. Nigel Farage recently said and that he didn't care about demographic change, same with Richard Tice. So, like, those are core issues that they are behind the public on. The public are concerned about becoming a minority in their own country by 2063. And according to YouGov again, a couple of months ago, 53% of the public said being Muslim is incompatible with being British. So now Reform are in a bit of a sticky situation because they've got Zia Yusuf, their head of policy now, who's doing like all their media rounds despite not being an MP, and Layla Cunningham, who is married to a Christian, but she is an Egyptian Muslim mother of 7, still a practicing Muslim, who they're probably going to run as a mayoral candidate against Sadiq Khan. It's like, oh, okay, thanks, base right-wing populist party. I can choose to vote for a Muslim or a Muslim. Well, the majority of the public don't want Muslims. They don't want to be run by Muslims, they don't want Muslims in their country, and so the based right-wing populist party is now setting themselves either against the electorate, or they're going to like pull the rug out from under the Muslims that think they're going to vote for reform and get a fair hearing. And you shouldn't be in the position, as the right-wing populist party, of making your voters think, who are you going to screw over? Me or the people I'm most worried about? Like, at least Rupert's consistent on this issue, yet again, he just doesn't have a political vehicle to enact his ends, which is a shame.
It's why it's performative populism. That's very different from actual populism, which is useful to some degree. I mean, in many ways. I mean, for one, it delivered Donald Trump. But the performative populism is ridiculous because on the face, what you're seeing from Reform is they're desperate for legitimacy from a broken system. I mean, that's why it's like this insecurity that you're seeing where they'll make these tactical, what they perceive as tactical concessions on migration, on religious identity, and a lot of procedural things, because they just hope that maybe they'll be perceived by the elite as like a legitimate entity. And what Rupert Lowe is challenging the entire thing, and he's saying, no, the entire status quo is broken. And this is why, to your point, what you're saying is this is what makes Lowe so much more similar to Trump. Is Trump, I mean, even though he has his squabbles with the media, he's never really fishing for legitimacy. He kind of understands that most Americans don't take the system at large very seriously anyway. So why bother attempting to seek legitimacy from it? And anytime Trump has, it's blown up in his face. I mean, that's what we kind of saw with the visa debacle recently. There's a whole host of other examples. He's been in the zeitgeist for 10 years now. But you can't simultaneously be this sort of renegade populist movement while also always being petrified of sort of what the system deems you, if they deem you as legitimate or not. It's just totally inconsistent, and it's kind of a boomer mentality in some ways, but it's also the mentality of people that it kind of reminds me of people that are in the media space that were like a failed comedian or failed actor, so then they become like a conservative pundit, and then they spend their entire time as a conservative pundit trying to launch these projects because they failed at what they really wanted to do, so they want to try and capture that in some way. That's what a lot of vibes I'm getting from Reform is like. A lot of these people within the party actually wanted to be, respectable Tory MPs, and they got shut out from power in a variety of ways. So now they're just kind of trying to launder their way back in, and it's just zero service to the British people whatsoever.
Yeah, reform shouldn't be a refugee camp for the washed up politicians of yesteryear. Again, I've been critical of reform, but I've also been very supportive and encouraging of it. I just want them, if they are going to win, not to fuck it up. And I'm worried they're going to fuck it up, and I'm worried that in 2 years, Farage, whether it's because of health or exhaustion or feeling like he's got the job done, and now he's got his lifelong security detail, his pension, and his speaking fees, resigns as Prime Minister and just hands it off to Zia Yusuf, much like Rishi Sunak was installed without anyone actually wanting him. And bear in mind, there is no internal election mechanism, like in the Conservatives or Labour, for reform. It is a one-man dictatorship. Now, I'm actually, in a courtesy Alvin fashion, kind of in favour of that, as long as the man at the top and the man in line for the throne are trustworthy, and I don't think that's the case. And so I think what you're going to get is the coronation of Zia Yusuf as the Prime Minister just after 2029, when actually people don't want that. What they want is, they're voting for reform because they think that Nigel Farage is basically on the same page as Rupert Lowe. They just don't know how different the two men are.
Yeah, what would the mechanisms be for the British right to put pressure on reform in any way? Because obviously you're seeing stateside that, I mean, there's a whole host of ways that the right wing base in America are able to apply pressure on the Trump administration or GOP politics at large and sort of get their way in many ways. Like you're alluding to, is reform being sort of a top-down operation. Let's just say they get into government. What ways would they even be accountable to the base, insofar as like any responding to pressure that's put on them by British patriots?
There's very little receptivity to trusting the plan and chimping. Like there is a little bit. Like we've got concessions on mass deportations and deporting the Boris wave, but we haven't got there on remigration. They're still talking the line, the sort of soft acceptable line on British values and Islam. So that's a problem. But also it's contingent on how many of, patriots are on the inside. And there's a few good people within reform, like James Orr, and I know a few people that work in head office, and they're really sound and on side and just want to make the party work, and I really encourage them to do so. But the more scrupulous reform become about their recruitment processes, you can't basically have any social media presence whatsoever. You can't have said anything that would offend the BBC, ITV, Sky News, Hope Not Hate, like a literal communist or activist organisation. They deselected 2 of the Lotus Eaters guys from being candidates over Hope Not Hate hit pieces, by the way. So they're allowing their enemies to set the terms of engagement and who is allowed in the club. And so if by the time they get to the finish line, everyone that's been running with them doesn't believe in the mission, then not only are we not going to be able to push them along and raise concerns and get them to address it, but Nigel Farage is going to have a bunch of people in his party who are so worried about getting called names by the media that they aren't going to have the courage to stand up to them. They're not going to stand up to the civil service, or they might even agree with some of the worst policies of the previous governments and so not want to repeal bits of legislation. They might go rogue. The worst example of this, and I suppose we can finish on it, is there was a reform candidate in the local elections who thankfully lost, but who had previously been a candidate in Bangladesh for the Bangladeshi Nationalist Party. Why the There was another guy as well who's since resigned, calling the party racist, because of course he has, who was saying, while he was running for reform, that black people should be paid reparations. There was another guy who defected from the Labour Party and was still a member of the Fabian Society when he crossed over. So, sorry, if you're what Reform are doing at the moment is no enemies to the left, not to the right. And what Rupert's done is not no enemies to the right, but he's not allowing people on the left to define who his enemies are. He's making very, very sensible decisions. Doesn't agree with Tucker on things like Islam at the moment, for example, or whether or not he can befriend Pakistani taxi drivers and Bangladeshis, which is a crazy statement to make in light of the rape gangs. But he is being more prudent in who he allows in the tent, likes of Charlie Downs, Harrison Pitt, Lewis Brackpool, Steve Edgington, myself, which we appreciate.
Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you very much for watching this installation of Across the Pond. We're going to wind it down here. We'll be back tomorrow with a fantastic interview with Ozpill. If you don't know him, you're gonna love him. It's gonna be a wild convo. I think he's quite the character. He's got all sorts of irons in the fire, and it'll be good to chat with him. And there's been a lot of Australians. I've noticed in the analytics. There's been a lot of Australians tuning in. So I think they'll be interested to hear some discussion on their homeland. Obviously, across the pond, Britain, America, but I think the broader Anglosphere, I think we all have some similar struggles. So I think this is going to be a great chat. So we'll see you all tomorrow. Connor, where can people find you?
They can find me on X at Con_Tomlinson. They can find me at YouTube at Connor Tomlinson. I'm almost at 100,000 subscribers, so make my Christmas, ladies and gentlemen. They can also find me on Substack under the same name. I appreciate all the support, and I do love the Timcast audience, Tate. They've always been very generous to me, and so I look forward to reading your comments and your guest suggestions. Please send us to them. We want to broaden our horizons here on the Online Right.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, you can find me on X and Instagram at Real Tate Brown. Yeah, hit me up. Let's. Who do you guys want to see? I mean, we've got some great suggestions coming in. People are loving it. We really appreciate the support. It's been fantastic. I hope it's scratching an itch that a lot of people were itching in our space. And thankfully, this first hour we were not rudely interrupted by Milo, but I did hear some commotion out back. So I don't know. Maybe he'll pop in again. I'm absolutely petrified. But yeah, with that, we'll see you all tomorrow for our episode with Ozpill. Thank you very much for watching.